Hello and welcome to Fats on Film. I am your host, Hannah Ogilvie, and this is a podcast where we discuss all things fat representation in film, TV and wider media. This week my guest is writer on film/film analysis and Hitchcockian. She is the creator and host of the Talking Hitchcock podcast, assistant editor of Ghouls magazine and senior contributor at Moving Pictures Club, and crazy cat lady. It's Rebecca McCallum. Hello, Rebecca!
Meow.
I was waiting for you, Rebecca, because when I listen to you on Moving Pictures Club, I'm like, you always come in with a line. I was like, what is she going to give me this episode?
Well, you weren't expecting that, were you?
I wasn't. You know what I thought? I thought you were going to be like, I'm your number one fan.
Too predictable. It's too predictable. No,
I would have loved it. I mean, just maybe for my own ego, I would have loved it. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. Yeah. Things are going well with the Hitchcock podcast. So just launched that back in April. So that's an incredible new journey that I'm on, and that's been really exciting, and it's been really well received and supported. So I'm just excited to have an excuse to talk about Hitchcock with anyone who wants to do it with me.
Okay, you've heard it here, folks. If you want to talk about Hitchcock, you got to get Rebecca on your podcast, because, I mean, I'm going to preface our conversation on 1990s Misery by saying I don't know Hitchcock at all. I am a complete noob to it. But what I would say, just by, consuming cinema at the rate I've consumed it, when I was watching Misery, I was like, I feel there's a lot of Hitchcock influence going on here.
Yeah, there's a lot of Hitchcock in this film, definitely. Where's DNA's all over cinema, so...
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, even if we're not aware of it, it's there.
Yeah, that's it. And I think, that's what I'm saying, where I don't know, I couldn't, not to the level you absolutely could, define it. It's a feeling for me, because it's just something I've always been immersed in, and the little I do know. And there were just some certain shots in this where I was like, oh, I feel like I've seen that before when I've, watched 50 greatest moments of cinema, and it's obviously just lodged into my brain. So let's we've kind of hinted to it already, but we're here to talk about Misery, 1990s Misery. So it's an American psychological thriller interestingly directed by Rob Reiner. So at this point in his career, he was known for doing, I'm going to say, lighter material. So Stand By Me, the Stephen King adaptation, Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally. And then his debut was This Is Spinal Tap, the mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap. So really interesting choice for this thriller. Based on the Stephen King 1987 novel of the same name. Screenplay was written by William Goldman, and he did Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The Princess Bride, also directed by Rob Reiner. And the 1975 version of The Stepford Wives, starring James Caan, Kathy Bates, and the gorgeous Lauren Bacall. It made $60 million at the box office, which actually, in terms of the films that we've covered on this podcast so far, does feel low. However, this film was so widely praised by critics, especially Kathy Bates' performance as the villainous Annie Wilkes. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress at the 63rd Academy Awards, making Misery the only film based on the making Misery the only film based on a Stephen King novel to win an Oscar, which I think is mad when you think about how prolific his work is. And then King himself, again, very notable, can be hard to please, our King, with the adaptations of his works, but he ranks this as one of his top 10 favourite film adaptations. And in 2003, Annie Wilkes was ranked number 17 on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains list. So, Rebecca, can you please let me and the listeners know, what is Misery all about?
So, incoming inadequate synopsis. So, after finishing his latest book, best-selling novelist Paul Sheldon is rescued from a car accident in a snowstorm by Annie Wilkes, who, upon getting him back to her isolated cabin, discloses that she is indeed his number one fan. As a bedridden Paul recuperates, Annie's obsession takes a turn when she reads his latest novel and realises he is killing off her favourite character. As Paul devises plans for escape, Annie becomes more controlling, unpredictable, forcing him to undertake rewrites. Will Paul be able to write himself out of this one? Or will he remain Annie's captive forever?
And ever and ever. Oh,
I set you up there.
You did. I did. And I went along with it. I was like, this is what Annie would say if she was here right now. Oh, so Misery is a fascinating film to bring onto this podcast, because when I first started exploring fet representation, Rebecca, I actually always thought of Annie Wilkes. I think she's such a notorious villainess, and also someone who's portrayed in a larger body. But you're actually the one who picked this film. So for my listeners, I have a long list of films and the guests can come on and pick what they want. So what was it about Misery that you wanted to come onto this podcast and discuss it and really get into the reads of this one?
Get into the reads. Oh, I'm in the reads, am I?
You're in the
reads. So we bounced a few other ideas around, and then you sent me your list, and I just got so excited when I seen it. Because for me, it wasn't one that jumped out at me, which is bizarre to me. And I just knew that this, given my relationship with the film, I knew this was something that I'd have a lot to say about. And then I was really excited to revisit it and look at it through a different lens as well.
Yeah.
And also to hear your thoughts and analysis on it as well. I guess, like, for Misery, it's a film I come to with many different hats. It's a film I come to as a woman. It's a film I come to as a creator. It's a film I come to as someone who experiences loneliness and someone who gets obsessed with things. So there's a lot in the mix of this film that I identify with.
Yeah, totally. I haven't seen this film in maybe 15 years. Truly, I haven't seen this film in years. And so if 15 years ago I would have been 15 years old, 15, 16, and I would have enjoyed it. It's a really good film. Actually, when I was Googling the reviews for this film, I found Roger Ebert's review, and he is so rude to Rob Reiner. I'm going to say something that's been said a million times. This is a fantastic film that really works in terms of suspense. And I think Stephen King, himself has commented on the fact that, like, Annie Wilkes is not your, out and out villain. She's not your out and out, oh, she's a psycho. And I apologise for the derogatory words there, but I hope you understand my sentiment. She's so layered, and I definitely think as an older woman, as someone who is in a larger body, as you say, someone who can get obsessive, someone who can get, like, we spoke just before this podcast, I can stay stuck in my head. I really empathise with Annie this rewatch. And I really appreciated Rob Reiner's hand behind the camera, how well he built up that suspense, how well he obviously directed James Caan and Kathy Bates to have this very odd relationship. And you're rooting for James Caan to do the smart thing, but also at the same time you're rooting for Annie Wilkes just to, like, calm down. Calm down, Annie, it's all good. And Roger Ebert said in his review that, like, anyone could have done what Rob Reiner did. It was a simple film that he said something along the lines of, I think I left the review up here so I could actually quote it directly. I was like, all right, mate. Yeah, what he does with Misery is essentially simply respectful. He brings the story to the screen, and it's just like, oh, okay. Many competent directors could have done what Reiner does here, and it's like, bit rude.
No, I think it's the talent is there in making it appear simple.
Yes, exactly that. We hear that all the time, right? When we see experts of their craft, or you see it a lot with, like, singers, and they make it look so effortless, and it's like, years and hours worth of dedication to the craft, and, like, that's what this is. And I just think, like, 15 years ago, Hannah would have appreciated, this is a really well-made, competently made film. The tension is really ramping up. I'm really enjoying the performances. But then 31-year-old Hannah comes in this week and watches it, and I am just so struck with sadness when I rewatched this. I felt... I don't mean to defend our villains, but I find myself in this position a lot in this podcast, especially when films utilise these actors, like these real people, their body types, to non-verbally communicate negative tropes. Because I just feel like, I don't know how you would take this, Rebecca, but say if you got cast because you looked a certain way, which amplifies negative tropes, I would find that really demotivating, you know?
Yeah, it is. And I think that's what I've appreciated about being able to go back and unpick it through this specific lens, is that there are so many just micro like prejudices and stereotypes that were underneath and very subtle. But I think perhaps even in the 90s, audiences wouldn't have picked up on that and wouldn't be having these types of conversations. And I found one interview with Kathy Bates, and the interviewer was asking her questions about, what was it like to work with the pig, and, how comfortable were you, and can you make an oink noise like a pig, and, just asking her very questions that were very built on, her physicality and not paying attention to the incredible craft that she brings to this role, the dedication that she brings. And she handles it really well, but you can see that there's a real air of discomfort there. And to have to be put in those positions when this is such a monumental, it's a pivotal moment in her career, and to not be taken seriously, A, because you're a woman, B, because of your body type, is now to watch. It's so harrowing. It really is.
Yeah, it's so disappointing, right? And in some ways, I'm so glad that she got the praise she deserved. She was awarded Best Actress at the Academy Awards, a very rare, horror thriller, Stephen King clearly nomination and win. I mean, is this the year of Silence of the Lambs, or is Silence of the Lambs the year after?
I think it's the year after.
Yeah. So I guess the Academy Awards were suddenly like, oh, hold on, there's some really good stuff happening in that space. Maybe we should award it. And then they went, okay, no more after this. No more. We're done letting horror in through the door.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I was thinking about in terms of just looking at what sits around this in terms of cinema at the time, is that this is a big boom period for those psychotic women in erotic thrillers, single white female.
Oh, yes. Very much so. So yeah, you're coming out of the erotic thriller, which is what, the late 80s, early 90s. So that is your Basic Instinct, your Fatal Attraction. I mean, would you put, what's that one with Robert Redford? I don't think that necessarily works. But it's still Demi Moore. Yeah. I watched that far too young, far too young. So we've just we've spoken about how we felt about bringing what am I trying to say? Yeah, looking at Annie through the lens of kind of fat representation. But let's talk about Annie. Let's talk about who she is as a person. So the film's main character is Paul Sheldon, played by James Caan. And we see, like you mentioned, he's an author, and he's in a blizzard. He gets swept off the road. First of all, he's stupid, because why is he driving that kind of a car in the mountains?
Wasn't he drinking beforehand as well?
Oh my God. Well, yeah, because he would have had his glass of champagne, right?
Yeah, he needs a DUI.
Paul, he's a nasty man. Anyway, so he gets, flies off the road in his Mustang, and he gets pulled out of the wreckage by this incredibly strong person, right? The hooded figure in the blizzard lifts him up, like fireman lifts him up, and then takes him, I guess, back to this person's house. We then get this great, point of view shot, as Paul Sheldon wakes up in the bed. And again, that's such a like iconic shot, like when someone like wakes up from a coma in the hospital room, right? And you get that blinking and then
the
all of a sudden, like what's going on? And you hear this, "I'm your number one fan." And he like blinks open, and we are met with Kathy Bates's face, Annie Wilkes' face. So she has a round face, a beautifully round face. She's got this, kind of straight brunette bob, probably just to her chin level. She's wearing a roll neck. She's wearing like a dress over the top of that. She's also got her cross around her neck. And she's got like tights on. She's dressed very modestly. Now, that's a very kind thing to say, because the film wants you to think she's dressed quite dowdy, which is not as a kind thing to say. And we see this a lot with when films want to get across to you that these characters are not to be sexualized, right? So they cover every bit of skin up. And you see that with Annie. So, like, instantly, again, Kathy Bates' face has minimal makeup on, very natural face. Again, another way to communicate to the audience, this is not someone we want to be sexualizing. This is someone almost like she's got no sexuality, which is really interesting because we find out as the film goes on, she very much has sexuality. And, she's got this very soft-spoken voice, as she's like, "I'm your number one fan, you're in good hands, I'm a nurse, I'm going to nurse you back to health, I managed to get your dislocated shoulder back in." She's quite proud of herself, right? She's proud of herself. And she doesn't shy away from the fact that she was actually stalking Paul Sheldon. That's how she comes across him, right? She says, "I was watching you from the Silver Lake Lodge, I knew that's where you would be. And I followed you in your car and I saw you get swept off the road in the blizzard and I've saved you." So she doesn't shy away from this fact that she's actually been super creepy, right? There's nothing, she's not ashamed of that. And it kind of gives this idea of like she doesn't understand social interactions, which kind of feeds into this idea of loneliness. Like, when was the last time she spoke to a person? What are your thoughts when we first meet Annie in this kind of context of nurse, but dressed in a more modest fashion?
Yeah, and I think that the first thing that strikes me is that shot and how the camera's often positioned of Paul looking up at Annie. Since that it is that power dynamic. And B, she often fills the frame, I find, the way that she's positioned within the frame. I agree. I think that sense of like covering up in these thick woolly cardigans, these pinafores as well. I think on top of that, I think the film maybe wants you to feel, I guess, how Paul feels, which is maybe slightly disarmed by this non-threatening, okay, no, this person wears pinafores and roll necks, like, that's safe. There's nothing threatening about, because that I guess that costume doesn't seem to denote any sense of power, be it like sexual power or status, or it's not a business suit, it's not like a tight fitting dress, it doesn't denote any, it doesn't say power, it just says like neutral, churchgoer, caregiver type role, doesn't it? So I think part of that is this sense of us and Paul feeling a little bit, okay, if we're watching this as a first-time viewer, okay, Paul's okay, he's safe.
yeah, it's interesting because he like, you use a really good word there, she's not threatening, and especially where she has this really cheery facade, she doesn't like to swear, she's very polite, she's incredibly flattering towards Paul, like, "Oh, you're the best right in the world. I'm honoured to be nursing Paul Sheldon back to health." And also, like, he doesn't have an option, right? He does not have an option. He cannot move. So he's probably thinking, like, I think, again, trying to think, well, how would I react in this situation? Yeah, I'd probably try to keep friendly, placate this person. At the moment, she seems fine. What's really interesting is her you could compare her to the other kind of female character in Lauren Bacall's character of Miss Sindel, Paul's literary agent, who you said again, like, there's a power struggle absolutely with Paul and Annie, but visually, Miss Sindel's wearing like the kind of power suit, right? Yeah. She's an agent. She's in New York. You know, she's the modern woman. Right,
she is the 90s, like, you know, American dream.
Oh, she looks stunning. It was sickening. I loved it. But you compare that to Annie, who is more in the past. You know, she doesn't like the swearing. She listens to Liberace. Like, there's something very dated about the way Annie is, and there's some. Oh, and even her obsession. So we should actually say. So Paul is famous for writing this franchise of books called the Misery series, which features this character called Misery Chastain in, I don't know, 1800 and blah blah blah. And these books are a series of romance novels, and Paul is he's kind of embarrassed by these books. These are the books that have made him who he is. But our gal Annie loves these books, loves, and obviously has a really strong affinity for the main character of Misery. So, and which means that, like, you know, even within her books, within her favourite books, she's living in the past via them because they're based in 1800, blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, you compare that to Miss Sindel, who is like the modern woman. She's a powerhouse. She's got the power suits on. She's making deals. She's making names in New York. It's just a real direct comparison. And the most important one is Annie is in a larger body and Miss Sindel is in a more slender body. And where we equate, a lot of the times, we see this in film as well as in real life, with a slender body with success.
Yeah, I was just about to say, yeah.
Yeah. I just thought it's just such an interesting comparison. And I copied some notes here. So King has characterised Annie Wilkes as a cunning, brutal and devious woman who hides her malice behind a cheery facade. And both the novel and the film portray her as extremely paranoid. And there's also suggestions that she may have borderline personality disorder. In the novel, we'll go into a bit more detail as novels can do, it's implied that she has day-long bouts with depression, during which she is seen to be self-harming herself. And Paul also finds evidence that she gorges herself on vast quantities of food. So we do get one scene in the film where she's like in her bed and she's watching some kind of like blind date show, isn't she? She's eating the Cheetos and drinking the full fat Coke. But that's the kind of only explicit relationship with food we see in the screen. I guess you could take a lot of connotations just from her body size, that there's obviously something more underlying there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's talk about, I guess, the depiction of food in the film and the associations that I see there with Annie's character.
Please, yeah.
I think, first and foremost, Annie's a giver of food to Paul, so she's a maker of food. It's like food is, I think sometimes it's really, in a heightened way, it's seen as the only form of language communication available to her. I think, we've got that scene of her in bed, you know, and I think what's interesting within that scene, she's watching a dating show, and again, you've got like the perfect woman going on a date, and, you know, she's sat there in a very different situation, so there's a juxtaposition there. And then I see Paul's plan of, will you have dinner with me tonight? This idea of him using food to hoodwink her is interesting to me. You know, and I think he almost like pokes fun as well. And, you know, when she serves him this meatloaf with Spam, and he's like, oh, you can't get this in a restaurant in New York. So it's just really cruel and horrible. You know, and I think there's just, it's not as pervasive as in the book, but I think it's certainly symptomatic of attitudes around, oh, this is a person in a larger body, therefore food is a way that they use to like communicate and to show love and care.
It's interesting you say that, because what I notice is we only see Annie eat on 2 occasions. So one is that when she's in that blind date, and it's juxtaposed, I can never say this word right, juxtaposed against her eating the Cheetos, the crisps, and having a Coke. And she's given Paul a full meal. So going back to your saying, that if she's using food to feed and nurture and bring Paul back to health, she doesn't give that same kindness to herself, right? And then the second time we see her eat is during that dinner date scene. And oh my God, this is where I come back to the empathy, Rebecca, because my heart broke for Annie. Like, he can see how desperate she is for attention, affection, right, and connection, and he uses that to his advantage. And I'm not saying that Annie should be absolved of all her sins. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's cruel. And the film is using all the tropes that we as a society have embedded into ourselves because of the media we've watched. Oh, well, then fat people really struggle to find love, right? Mm-hmm. And here's Annie being seduced by her, most favourite author. Okay, yeah, I know she's kidnapped him and I know she's holding him against his will, but he is seducing her using what he has available, which is his charm, which is his status in her life. And it's just so heartbreaking. This is the scene where she curls her hair. She puts on some makeup again. We go back to when we first meet her. She's obviously not meant to be sexualized in any way. We're not meant to see her as a romantic connection to Paul. But in this, we see that she's putting in the beauty standard effort of putting a bit of lipstick on to make herself look more feminine. And this is what I actually wanted to come to in the characterization of Annie, where fatness, especially in women, can be seen as not very feminine because, unfortunately, women are always perceived through the male gaze, especially in film. And the male gaze means that all women need to be sexualized. But where we've distinguished that fatness is not sexual, that means that fat women are not meant to be attractive. You're not meant to fancy them. In films, they can be the butt of the joke in a lot of things, and this is a real pull of a reference to bring into Misery right now. But in the film Road Trip, there is a scene where one of the side characters, like the kind of scrawny, thin character, has a relationship with this fat black woman, and it's literally a joke because it's like, oh, how could he find her so attractive? Like that's ridiculous, right? And so that understanding of how attractive fatness is pervasive in all of cinema. So you bring that back into Misery. The idea is, like, we know as an audience, well, Paul's never going to fancy Annie, so this is all a bit of a ploy to get her on side. And one of the reasons why we know it's a ploy is because she's not meant to be attractive. Mm-hmm. And it just hurts. If I'm honest, it just hurts me, because I'm like, there's so many reasons why she shouldn't be attractive. And, one of them is because she's a serial killer. But that's not what they're leading with. They're leading with how she looks. And then on top of that, how she acts, like that really, I don't know what the right word is here, but that incredibly enthusiastic way that she runs into the room. It's like, oh, Misery, I love her so. And she's just so over the top and dramatic. And you can see she's obviously living vicariously through Misery to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. And that's not attractive. That's kind of, I'm trying to avoid using inflammatory language, but it's just so normalised in our society. But it's I don't want to say crazy, but it is crazy behaviour. You know what I'm saying?
I think for me, it's like I do see lots of notes of Annie being presented as someone who's like undesirable. So when she expresses romantic feelings or like attachment for Paul, this "I love you, Paul," the way it's delivered and the way it's received as well by Paul, it almost feels like we're being invited to collude in this idea that she stands no chance. And it's like, let's feel sorry for her, because she's and it's almost like she looks a bit foolish and, you know, inviting us to not mock, but maybe mock is the right word. And, you know, she says things like, I'm not a movie star type as well, and you don't love me. So there's this idea that you've got to live up to this kind of expectation. And with having the pig as a pet as well, I feel like there's strong connotations there of, like, you know, animalizing Annie and, like, linking her with, like, monstrosity and, like, just those kind of, like, subtle things, like linking her with animals and cows and chickens. It's like, it just feels very it just feels very it's just so distasteful, and it's so, as you say, it's all focused on, you know, not who she is, but how she appears.
Yeah, I mean, even the fact that the pig is called Misery, which in some ways from a fan point of view, like, we've all named our pets after things we love, I get that, but where she also believes she is Misery to a certain extent, or she aspires to be Misery, that connotation is really ugly in hindsight. And I think what's really odd about all this is, obviously, like, Stephen King to a certain point wanted Annie to be larger, you know, the fact that he writes in she has some kind of relationship with food, or eats large quantities of food. Oh god, I just lost my point. Oh yeah, that's it. But Stephen King has said that this is actually his book about his own addictions, and how you know, him kind of quitting whatever drugs he was on, alcohol, and how he also felt trapped by the horror genre. And so Annie is like the humanization embodiment of all of those things. That's quite a very complex character to have created, right? That she's meant to embody all of this negativity in King's life. And I think it says a lot that his interpretation of all those things is a larger woman, someone he perceives to be ugly, to use your word, is a very good one, but it's a very cutting one. The monstrosity of a person, aligning her to beasts and farm animals. You know, like, you know, again, like, pigs are notorious for, like, rolling around in their own shit. Just like, you know, the fact that she welcomes the pig into the house. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a pig. I would love to have a pet pig one day. But to let him come into the house, and you see Paul's repulsion at the pig coming up to him. And I even wrote in my notes, I was like, Paul, calm down. It's just a pig. It's just a pig. But again, we are meant to be Paul. We're meant to view the situation through Paul's eyes. So if the decision is for Paul to be repulsed at the pig, then the idea is that the audience should also be repulsed at the pig. And I just think it's so interesting when you boil down any of these conversations, the question is, what does the film want the audience to feel at this point? Right? And you mentioned this idea that we're meant to be on Paul's side, we're colluding with Paul to make a fool of Annie. And it's meant to be, you know, to save his life. I get it, the stakes are high. But it's done in such a cruel way, where, you know, we're looking at from this specific lens 30 years later. And we're like, oh, but by doing that, you're actually brandishing a whole section of people, a whole group of people, you know, by saying, oh, well, you're like Annie, you know, you'll never find love. I mean, actually, you know what? That loneliness, that the idea of it's almost justified. It's justified to mock Annie because she's lonely, because she hasn't found love.
Oh, okay, yeah. So because she's failed at life, that's okay.
Yeah, and also maybe this idea, again, like, we see fatness as a moral failing in society. Yeah. So, like, it's a choice. So, again, this is idea of, like, well, she's chosen to be like this. She's chosen to not wear makeup, to wear the dowdy clothing. Yeah. I'm using air quotes. Dowdy clothing. Therefore, what does she expect?
she deserves. Yeah, that's definitely, I think, the insinuation, and like that idea of, you know, fatness and loneliness. It's like she's hidden, she's isolated in terms of, you know, her environment. She's escaping the real world through these books because she, you know, she's isolated. This idea as well of her having to keep people there because she doesn't have anyone is I know it's like, I know it's criminal, but it is heartbreaking at the same time. You know,
I know.
It's like she can't find someone in the real world to have that relationship with. And she talks a lot about being lonely, and that's where, again, like you said at the top, Hannah, this is not a two-dimensional character at all.
No.
You know, we hear about the night shifts and the reading, and, you know, that's where I feel that sort of pendulum of the representation is I think it's trying to invite us in the, well, actually no, I'm gonna say I think Kathy Bates invites us through her performance. I think that's what it is. I don't think the intentions are behind there directorially. Like you say, I agree. I think we're in the bed. It's like we're Paul Sheldon, but I think Kathy Bates brings that through her performance. That, you know, that empathy and that humanity and that, you know, that three-dimensional aspect to a character where we do feel, oh, this is the villain, but she's also a victim as well.
Yeah. I mean, if the I don't know who made this insinuation, but if she does exhibit signs of borderline personality disorder, well, then it's untreated, right? And people live with borderline personality disorder every day, and they're like normal people. You know, they don't go around kidnapping authors. So you wonder, like, oh, if she'd got the help she needed, would she have found herself in this situation? Mental health is incredibly important. One thing we've danced around is this cherry facade, as King said. This idea she presents herself to Paul, and again, this sickly sweet voice. Oh, Paul, you know, like that. I read that phrase. Oh, Paul said at least 15 times throughout the film, and it's very like, I don't know. I can imagine someone in a very long dress on the grass just be like, "Oh, Paul," you know. It's very romantic and extravagant, and I really love the visual it gives me. But that is a facade, because we see at the very early on, we see this anger come through Annie, this rage. And she gets so upset about the swearing, for example, so Paul's written this new book that he hopes is going to make him more of a, I don't know, respectable author rather than the Misery series that has made him famous and probably very rich. And she reads it. She's so excited. She's like, oh, I get to read like an unpublished Paul Sheldon. And she's so upset about the amount of swearing that happens in this book. And we get this incredible scene where she just starts almost screaming at the top of her lungs, like mocking the choice for making these characters swear. But the camera is low, right? Very low, and it's zooming up towards her chin. And again, that's a very... we see that camera angle a lot with fat characters because it accentuates the size of their chin, of their face. And again, like, the easiest way to tell if a character is fat is if they've got a round face. So again, we're kind of accentuating that, and that kind of... It's, I hate this word, Rebecca, but it's not flattering. It's not a flattering angle for anybody, but especially for Kathy Bates in this moment. But I think it's to uglify her.
It's like a purposeful choice, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and this is it. We're starting to see this, like, not only is she, you know, again, it's... Her cover is one of someone who should not be sexualized, someone who we should not find attractive, but her personality is one she has crafted to hopefully woo Paul. And then in this moment, we see that anger pull through, we see the camera angle change, and we see that, oh no, she's also ugly underneath. So, and I'm sorry if I offend anyone by calling Kathy Bates ugly. She's absolutely not ugly. She's absolutely not. But in this film, that's what they want you to think.
Yeah, we're talking about intention, aren't we?
Yeah. Just like defending Kathy Bates till I die. And we see this mask slip, and we start to see it slip throughout the whole film. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that representation of anger, especially as a woman.
I've seen some of your Instagram stories, Hannah, so...
Oh my God.
You do. So, yeah, I again picked up on... And I feel like maybe I'm almost being... I'm contradicting myself here, because we've talked about her presentation as being non-threatening, but I also read this idea of fat, therefore angry, therefore full of rage. Okay, so that there's just this anger under the surface.
Like bubbling away.
Yeah, and that can't be controlled. And then that... But then I also read her as a character that then has power and can be threatening as well. So there's a lot of like things in that mix, and I think she's someone as well who's underestimated a lot and underestimates herself as well. Like not just by other people, but she underestimates herself. It's like when he asks her, "Oh, why don't you come up with a name for the title?" It's, "Oh, I could never do. Joe, I could never do that."
So such a good point. Yes.
So I think, you know, the idea of, again, I guess it's back to the disarming nature and then a seeming passive, but then, you know, I think the question for me is how aware is she of what she's doing? It's like, is that something that she purposefully, like this facade, does she know when to use it? Because she does have... And that's another thing with the representation as well, this idea of like mood swings. Like women have mood swings, and, you know, one minute we're crying at the window and the next we're yelling, and, you know, it's like maybe these things happen, but, you know, let's portray it in a responsible, like, you know, let's give it the complexity and the humanity that it deserves, you know. Just, and I think there's things in there as well about, we spoke about Paul poking fun at her at the dinner, but there's also other times where, you know, I just feel it's like the paper's wrong that she buys. She can't remember the name of the Sistine Chapel. And there's this idea that she's maybe like uneducated to a degree as well. You know, I think that's another micro element that I just see there being just another thing that maybe links to, I don't know if it is directly the representation, but it's certainly, I think it's certainly an intention behind how we're meant to view her as a person.
Yeah, you make such a good point about that kind of like her insecurity over her own intelligence or her own standing in the conversation with Paul, because she views Paul as clearly like a genius in her time.
Yeah, she says like my genius. I like that she kind of
even
like
says
takes ownership. Yeah, she uses a lot of like my. You know, like this, she gets quite possessive, very possessive, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. That's very interesting. Like she's trying to take credit, but then at the same time also being like, "Oh no, I absolutely could not." And then obviously as the film goes on, she's getting more and more comfortable in that space.
Well, she's like his editor by the end of the film.
Yeah, totally. She's there writing away, right? Yeah, I think there's that scene about. I believe it's about the paper when he says, "Oh, this isn't the right one, it smudges." And she has that rant. She's like, "I've nursed you back to health. I cook your meals. I wash you." And then she goes, "Why is it not enough, Mr. Man?" And I'm like, I think a lot of women really felt that rant, right? Really felt like, I'm doing so much for you and it's still not enough. And again, where she might maybe not match Paul in, I don't know, intelligence, book smarts, she's obviously incredibly capable and intelligent at living out in the middle of nowhere on her own. What am I trying to say? Farming animals. She's a nurse, so she's medically competent. So she actually is smart in other ways that Paul isn't. So it's like this idea of like, well, what is intelligence, right? That's such a like, I mean, it depends on what lens you're bringing it onto. But she obviously feels inadequate to some degrees with Paul, and that's why she puts him on such a pedestal. But then especially in this particular rant, where he almost like calls her out for getting this wrong. It's the first time we've had that from Paul, and he's trying to take almost like undermining her in her house, and she just loses it. And I was just sat there with my notes going, I don't blame you, hon. I think I'd have lost my shit too. I think I get it, Mr. Man, and throws the paper at his busted legs. You know, it's a really good moment. But I also wanted to bring it back to what you said about how she's so full of rage and how that might personify in her body. I mean, it's much more understood now, but the phrase eating your feelings, I feel, is very appropriate for Annie. As someone who is recovering from binge eating disorder, that is why I had my eating disorder. I ate my feelings. I didn't want to express my feelings. I was quite scared of my feelings. Not that I thought I was going to go into a murderous rampage like our Annie, but it was almost like I didn't feel safe, or I didn't feel like I had permission to express myself. So I placate myself, and the best way I could do that was through food. And I feel that's what Annie is doing to a certain extent as well, because we see she's having to placate herself throughout, I don't know, 3/4 of the film, where she's being this sickly sweet woman. That's not her true self. Her true self is angry, lonely, depressed, murderous. And she's having to suppress that in order to seduce. I know I use this word seduce for Paul to Annie, but actually Annie is trying to seduce Paul as well. And I also think there's another really nuanced point of view, which is this idea that I come back to how fat women particularly are not feminine, or not perceived to be feminine, I should say. And it's like Annie knows that, so that's why she has this overly feminized voice, sickly soft. I can't swear. That's not a womanly thing to swear, I'm just a good housewife. I'm a nurturer. I'm a nurse. I'm a mother. Like all these like really
archetypes, yeah.
Yes, exactly that. And I just think, well, that's not truly who Annie is, but she's having to disguise that. So she comes across as feminine. So almost like she's almost trying to like overly compensate for her visual by pushing, like you said, these feminine archetypes to the surface. And we all know it won't last. It doesn't last, these things. You can't, if you're not your authentic self, it will not last.
Oh, that's such an interesting point. That she has to play up to these elements of her have to be like hyper feminized.
Yes,
and it's performative. But I don't mean performative in a kind of devious way. It's a very, I see it as being very much tied to like anxiety and anguish and like you say, we've got two seductions, but one is sincere and one is not.
Yes.
The more I think about this, the more heartbreaking it gets.
I know. And also on that, so again, we see her interact with two other people throughout the film. So it's Paul. Then we see her interact with the driver in the village, in the town, and she's swearing, she's blaring.
Rage again, yeah.
Rage. But she's allowing that rage to come through, because she's not trying to impress that guy. That guy's just a random guy. She's not trying to seduce him, not trying to make him underestimate her. But in the third interaction is with our good friend, Sheriff Buster. Absolutely, I just adored Buster in this film. What
a cutie.
The MVP, the cutie, MVP. I love this look. I like massive justice for Buster.
He's like
podcast.
He's stepped out of Twin Peaks. I just love him.
literally. Like I just feel like. I mean, I read that in the novel he isn't as proactive, and they wanted they wanted the character to do more in trying to like actually solve Paul Shelton's disappearance in this film, and I appreciate because it's fantastic character.
I just like one of my favourite moments, and I always laugh at it even though I've seen it 100 times, is when he's like, we'll put it through the system, and he just puts a post-it note on the board.
And then the wife at one point is trying to organise. I was like, you're ruining my system. Here's that note, exactly where it should be, just amongst this mess.
2 phone calls, busy morning.
Busy. So good. That it's such a good moment. Again, with Rob Reiner, the director, being more known for like comedic films, you see it come through with Buster and his wife, especially. But also, actually, James Caan, his performance can come across quite funny at times.
Yeah, very much like wink, wink.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
When he's waving to her, like when she's outside.
And then like this, flips of the bird. I was like, oh, it's so good. And she's just like, yeah, oh, you kidder. Like, just, really water off a duck's back. She really doesn't mind.
Oh, gosh, Annie. Oh,
I know, bless her. But yeah, so we see Annie interact with Buster towards the end of the film, and she's again sickly sweet. Mm-hmm. Like, he goes, oh, can you tell me anything about Paul Sheldon? He's like, well, he was born in 1948 in West Virginia, wherever it is. And she's like, no, I mean, like, recently, like, he's disappeared. She's like, oh, gosh, I did see that. Oh, it's such a shame. He's a genius of our time. And, so soft and sweet and, like, overly eager, but, like, it's one of those, oh, come in, I've got nothing to hide. And so we see this persona come through, but again, it's because she very much does have something to hide. And it's that underestimating. If I'm super, I don't know, ditzy, feminine, maybe a little bit bimbo-y even, like, and I say that with love, I love the word bimbo, then Buster's not going to suspect me.
Yeah, we're back to that disarm with charm, isn't
disarming. Exactly that. And I just, again, like, as much as my heart breaks for Annie and her representation and all that, I just love those layers she has, and we get to see them as well. And I think as women, I just find it so interesting how much and it sounds like you have been able to empathise with her. And I wonder if that's a very gendered thing, or whether like male listeners of the pod could like reach out and be like, no, I get why Annie's like, empathetic.
Yeah, because in that moment you're in that kind of, well, I find myself in that conundrum position that I actually quite like in films when you are, Buster's there and Paul's there and he's in the basement. It's like, oh, you want him to be found, but I kind of want to see Annie get away with it as well.
This is it. I was like, interesting. So we get to a point in the film where she thinks the jig is up. I've got 2 bullets in this gun. We're going out together. And I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna go like that. She's very much, again, you can imagine.
It's so romantic, that, isn't it? It's very romantic. In a very sort of melodramatic, like tortured artist soul,
Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah. And when we're talking about misery and the time that's set in, it just feels, it feels very old romantic,
Yeah, and especially where, like, you can imagine she lives for a time where, like, this kind of drama could have happened. Like, you could be betrothed to each other ever since, like, you were young. Like, she mentions at one point how she was married, and no longer. I think that's what she said. Like, the night shifts were hard, right? And obviously, for whatever reason, she's decided, she hasn't found another person. And, you can argue it's because she's so obsessed with these books, but it's also because she is undesirable. Who would want to be with Annie? And I hate actually saying that because it just makes me really sad. But let's move on to... So we mentioned, like, kind of like, what does her body portray to the audience? And we've already touched on this idea of, like, underestimating, undesirable, lonely. But interesting, like, Rebecca, in your notes that you sent to me before this, you said fandom. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to pick your brains on that one because I think it's a really fascinating, and again, another nuance, right? Another layer to our Annie.
I mean, Annie girl, wow.
Love her.
All these years later as well.
I know.
These are things that I never seen before, and it's just, you know, that's because of your podcast and how you're making me think, which is, you know, a big thank you to you for inviting that, you know, different perspective.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that I was picking up on, and I was almost feeling, oh my God, there's so many things I'm mounting up here, that I was finding myself getting quite, not angry, but just very, like, it's like I wanted to go outside and start a bit of a riot. This idea of, and it may be starting to become outdated now, but certainly, obviously, I always pull back and go in 1990s as well. But this idea of fandom and a fan being someone who's like fat, lazy, odd, you know, lonely, no friends. And I really see that, you know, that being upheld through the character of Annie here, and just this idea that, oh, a fan must be someone who stuck, someone who has time on their hands, who like over-identifies with people because they don't have people, you know, around them in their real life, be that Paul like a celebrity, or be that Misery in the book, so fictional characters as well as people in the real world. And I just found that so fascinating, that, and I don't know if that was the intention in the book or the film, but I really felt like that played into what they were trying to suggest with their character. I don't know what you think about that.
No, 100%. As you were talking, I was going through my Rolodex of references to work at when we've seen this before. 'Cause this is a trope, right? This is absolutely a trope. This idea of like an obsessive fan who is in a larger body. And it's interesting because I'm not sure exactly what the trope is saying. Is it saying that, you know, we're going back to that idea of like we're so stuck in our own heads and our own fantasies that we're not looking after our actual bodies? Is that what it's trying to say? But like, again, I'm going to bring up some really random references. I'm going to bring up comic book guy from The Simpsons, bigger body, obsessed. Interestingly, again, that like kind of fat nerd like trope. You see that more in male characters, granted, but it's kind of the similar here, and it's almost this like desperation. Yeah. And we see desperation portrayed a lot in larger bodies. And again, I don't know why. It's probably something I need to think about and ponder more, what it is about fatness and desperation. And maybe it comes back to that undesirability, you know, like, well, if you're in a bigger body, then you might be missing that affection, that attraction, something that's so important to us as human beings, right? I'm not saying that romantic love is what we should all be striving for, because love comes in many forms. But in our society, romantic love is the top tier, right? And if you are not hitting that, if you're not hitting that top tier romantic love, you can feel undesirable, and you can start feeling desperate for it because you're missing out, right? You see this a lot with when films like to portray bridesmaids, they often have a larger bridesmaid in the thing. And again, straight off the head, it's a film I bring up a lot in this podcast, but Bridesmaids with Melissa McCarthy, or even, again, a weird pull. I'm bringing up some really weird references this podcast, but the film Maid of Honor with Patrick Dempsey, and there's a plus size bridesmaid in that film, and I'm sure there's so many more out there, because this idea of, like, you know, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Because apparently larger people can't find people to find them attractive, according to cinema, which we all know is not true. But this is when representation matters, right? You need to see yourself being successful and achieving things to make it easier for you to realise, oh, I can do that too. That's why it's so important. If we don't see, I don't know, women in CEO positions, being business owners, being, I don't know, independent, being childless, right? Not, you know, not pursuing motherhood, we might not realise it's an option for us. Mm-hmm. Same with larger bodies, same with any kind of body. If we don't see it, we don't realise it's an option for us. So if we're continuously seeing that larger bodies are being used as a non-verbal cue for undesirability and therefore desperation, if we follow that fact through, then maybe we start to lose hope that normal mark of a successful life is not achievable to us. And that's when you start to get lonely. And it's interesting, Rebecca, because I introduced you as a crazy cat lady at the very beginning. And I'm because you added that in. But that is a synonym for loneliness, right? For loneliness, undesirability. Now, I also have a cat, and I would also call myself a crazy cat lady. But, like, I wouldn't associate myself with undesirability or loneliness. But that's taken a lot of self-love to get to that point.
Yeah, no, it's a daily practice, right?
It is, but I wonder, like, again, if we were to unravel those threads of why we have to make it a daily practice, that we don't wake up with this level of self-assuredness, like, no, I've got this, I'm like the main character of my own story, all that kind of stuff. Well, is it because when we, watch these films when we were younger, when we watched these teen dramas, teen comedies, horrors, God, like, enter film genre here, we saw people who looked like ourselves not be the main character, not be the love interest, not be, successful. And that's why this podcast meant so much to me, because I'm like, we need to call this out as a problem it is and look to address it. Because it's insidious. Mm-hmm. It's insidious. It's like, you're wearing glasses, Rebecca, so I'm going to pick on it because I wear glasses when I'm working. But again, it's this idea of like, well, if you wear glasses, you can't be sexy. Think about like the teen comedy where like they have the makeover. Oh, take their glasses off. She's beautiful. It's something as simple as that. It has such a dramatic effect.
Yeah, it does. It does. I'm very proud of my glasses and
as you should be. You look stunned.
They're part of my identity now. They're part of me. I know that may sound, far-fetched, but they are.
No. It's not far-fetched at all. I totally understand what you mean, and they are part of who you are. My partner also wears glasses. Obviously, I think he's the most gorgeous man in the world, but when he has those glasses off, I'm like, but there's something missing. I'm so used to seeing you with glasses. Yeah, so again, that fandom thing is really interesting because it is a choice. It's a purposeful choice, and I think after I come off of this, I am going to have a quick Google to see other reinforcements of this trope because I know they exist. I'm just struggling to pull them out right now. My Rolodex of references. So the other thing, again, we kind of touched on, but I wanted to bring it up properly, is this idea of like her strength. So she is clearly a very strong person, right? We see her lift Paul twice in this film.
Yeah, and then Paul has to get strong to kind of beat her. You see him with the typewriter and stuff. It's like this idea of, strength was something that kind of peripherally ran through my mind. And Paul obviously being bedridden, and I guess his physical prowess is declining, and we see her in this really strong position with that opening as well, I think. And it's kept ambiguous, I guess, as to, is this a man, is this a woman, is this, you know, and I think audience may assume one thing when they first see it. But yeah, no, the strength thing is interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's probably twofold, right? Because I think, on one hand, I think strength is aspirational. I think it's awesome that she's that strong, that she can lift. I'm assuming James Caan is strong, is taller than Kathy Bates, or was. James Caan passed now?
Yeah.
I think he has. Yeah. And so the fact that she can lift him up is really cool. It also shows a level of fitness, which I think is awesome to see in a bigger body. Like, you know, she is clearly fit and competent and able and physically capable. Awesome. But it also, like you just said, it kept ambiguous with, like, at the very beginning, like, is this a man or is this a woman? Because strength is a masculine trait, and I am being incredibly binary when I say that. It's not something that is feminized a lot in cinema or in our society. And I think that's a really interesting, again, coming back to this idea of, like, where, you know, her body is meant to symbolize conventional femininity. It is masculinized. And I wanted to bring in this idea. So when I was watching it, I got this vibe of how she was dressing and how she was wearing her hair, of she came across a bit like a stereotypical lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, is that intentional? and I was like, oh, can I say that? Like, am I being incredibly homophobic by just making that assumption? I didn't want to offend anyone. But like, even like the way she would talk about misery would be like, you've murdered my misery. I want her. It's just like kind of going back to that possession thing you mentioned earlier. Like, it's hers. And I wondered whether is that her saying my misery because she thinks of misery as herself, or does she love misery? Like, does she love the character of misery? And is she potentially a closet lesbian? You know, if you think back to the fact she's ostracized herself from society, she dresses in a non-stereotypical feminine way. Her body not being a feminine shape, or get air quotes, please. I'm not saying that. That's what I think. I'm saying that's what the film's saying. I was just like, oh, is there like something there? And then I Googled it because that's what you do, right? And I found this article from the Horror Homeroom, and it's called Raging Butch, Annie Wilkes, Female Masculinity and Anger by Beth Cattleman. And Beth goes into detail about everything I've just kind of mentioned. She just says it a lot more articulately than I did. And she talks about this idea of like Annie Wilkes' kind of characterization could be a reflection on Stephen King's misogyny and how he views women. She goes on about like how Annie is kind of almost like stereotypical butch kind of lesbian subculture. There's this idea that Liberace, being her favourite artist, who was famously a closeted gay guy, didn't come out until after he was gay, even though everyone thought he was gay. He just never publicly came out. So there's like all these little like ideas of, oh, like, is there some kind of closet homosexuality going on there? And again, you can also play into this idea of like, that's why she's on her own, because perhaps she has been ostracized from society for being gay, especially if like she's in a small town, I don't know where we're meant to be, small town USA. No wonder she's kind of ostracized herself or isolated herself, because she's not safe to live as she truly would like to be. And that comes back to this idea of authenticity. You know, we see she has so many layers of not being authentic, or putting a facade up and then it crumbling down around her. Like, I don't know if I, like, me and Beth are onto something, or if we're crazy.
So I guess to the question of misery, and whether that there's like a queer read in there in terms of Annie's attraction, I think I've always read it as like misery fitting this almost like feminine ideal. So it's the white floaty dress and the hair, and she's slim. You see her on the cover. It's like the uber feminine, like she's like a little Botticelli angel, right? So, so I wonder, does Annie see that? And you know, she sees that as like, well, that's the perfect picture of what it is to be feminine, and that's why she is so, I don't know, into it. But this idea of queerness is not something I've ever thought about, but I think it's really interesting. I guess we've spoken about, you know, the husband and then not having relationships after that. I mean, that could be, I mean, it could speak to all this, like, not being able to express yourself and things like that. And yeah, I mean, could totally see her perhaps using Paul as a mask almost for what she really loves is misery, and that feeding into a queer reading of Annie.
Yeah, I think there's something definitely there, but I absolutely agree with your idea of, like, you know, she can view or does view misery as the epitome of what femininity is, and she knows she isn't that, therefore aspires to be that. And I guess, like, where she is in control, and I'm going to use quotes there because I don't necessarily think this is something you can control, but she thinks she can control her personality. So that's why we see that facade, right? But she can't control her appearance, and she can't control her body size, because those things, you know, again, to like blow out some myths around fatness in this world. Sometimes you're just fat. Like, you could do, you know, all the horrendous diets and, you know, exercise 5 days a week. Your body just likes to hold on to fat, and that's totally cool. That's what we need to normalize. And also, even if you just are fat, that's also cool. I'm not going to like make it good or bad. But anyway, point being is, it's out of Annie's control, her body size. Therefore, the thing she can control is how she then presents her personality. And again, like, you can imagine how she does that is probably very similar to how Misery might talk in the books. Mm-hmm. You know how I was saying how I just imagine that, oh, Paul, like, that's very, I imagine.
Yeah.
Very Misery Chastain, yeah. So, I think you're right. This idea that is what she is trying to emulate as much as she can, because she's probably being told her whole life that she isn't a looker, you know, she isn't wife. Yeah. Yeah, she's not wife material, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting reading. What I'll do is I will link that article in the show notes just so people can read it, because I just thought it was a fascinating point of view. Like I say, I hadn't thought of it before. I took it this time, I saw it, and someone else agreed, and I was like, oh, cool. Are we the only two? I don't know.
Well, that's the richness of Annie's character, right? It's just shows.
This is it.
She keeps throwing things at us, and we're like, hey.
I know. So let's move on to the ending.
Yes.
So the ending we get. So Paul has been writing Misery's Return with editor in chief Annie, and Annie is so excited, isn't she? She's like, oh, who's she going to end up with? Like, is it going to be this guy or this guy? It has to be this guy, right? And you know, he's like, "Oh, you'll have to wait." He's so cheeky with her at this point, right? And we've completely skipped past the hobbling scene. She realizes that Paul has been leaving the room because he had a little Kirby grip to get out, which I was like, "Yeah, do it, Paul. Intrusive, Paul. Like it."
Paul from the hood.
I know. Apparently, this incredibly like middle class man can unpick locks. Right? So yeah, she punishes him by putting, I mean, I don't know if I need to tell you, you've probably seen this scene before, but yeah, she puts a block of wood in between his ankles and mallets them. It's a great scene. I was like, ooh, baby.
It's like your breath, you lose your breath for a few seconds.
Yeah, I think James Caan's got, you know, his pain feels really real in that moment, right? He is like even further bedbound than he already was. Yeah. Relying on Annie to care for him. So he continues to write, and then the police, our Buster, starts driving down the lane. He kind of makes a connection that, oh, Annie's obsessed with Paul. Paul's missing. I should go check out Annie's place. Like, well done, Paul.
Great work.
Well done, Buster. Yeah. Yeah, detective work. And, she drugs Paul, throws him down the stairs, and Buster comes in, has a mooch round. She has an excuse for everything, like, oh, this is my little writing room. I've been trying to emulate Paul's work because that's what God has said to me. She brings up God. And then eventually, some banging is heard, and Buster goes to investigate the cellar or the basement, and Annie... Whoa, shotgun through the stomach of poor Buster. I mean, I know it was coming, but God, it was like so graphic. I was like, oh, he didn't have to go out like that.
Yeah.
Did he?
I know, and that's one moment where I'm not with Annie. I'm like, oh.
No. All of our defense for Annie kind of takes a bit of
a bit of a back step for a moment.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. Also, like at this point, Paul knows that she's a serial killer, that she's like an angel of death, and she's been murdering babies and old people. She's not a good person. Annie is not a good person, but the film makes out that one of her bad qualities is how she looks, and that's not okay.
Exactly, yeah. And how, like, Psycho-esque is this moment of, like, storing someone in the basement? It's...
There's a few scenes where, again, like, it's just so, like, I don't know, like a 1950s thriller where like he finds the phone, he turns it over, and it's actually just like a pretend phone. And I was like, no, it's so good. So yeah, she like blows poor Buster out. He's gone, and Paul manages to grab some fuel, some lighter fluid, take it back upstairs, and he threatens to burn Misery Returns. And so there we have a tussle. The book burns. Annie attacks, throws him into the window. Punch, punch, punch. He then stuffs the burning embers of Misery Returns into Annie's mouth and shouts, "Eat it." Which I thought was really interesting words.
Yeah, very interesting. I've got that here as well. We're back to that, like the association with like punishing her with like a kind of simulative eating, like it's what are your thoughts on that? I'd be really interested to hear.
My gut feeling is it is nasty. It's this idea of like you need to now consume, almost like, because Misery Returns is this idea of like, it's torturous. This has been torturous for the 4 weeks that Paul's been in this house, you know, bedbound. She has forced him to bring back to life this character he fucking hates, right? It's this jail cell for him. It's this idea like, I have to kill Misery so he can then go on to the next thing in his writing career. She is forcibly keeping him here, keeping him in this limbo of magically make Misery return. And so in his punishment for that, he's like, you need to consume the thing that I hate, that has been torturing me for the 4 weeks. You now need to consume it. I'm going to choke you to death with the thing that you've been choking me to death with. It's almost like suffocating her. But there's also this other connotation of her relationship with food as well. Mm-hmm. And almost like nothing he would do would satiate her appetite. Right? So even if he wrote Misery Returns and they printed it and all that, she'd have made him do another one. She was never going to let him go. And it's the idea that he would never have been able to satiate her appetite, and her appetite is obviously massive because, again, look at the body image, look at all these like non-verbal cues we're getting for how much of an appetite she might have. I don't know if that's what their intention was, but that's going to be my reading.
It's it's so aggressive. It's so aggressive.
It's a very aggressive scene. It's very violent. There's lots of blood. There's lots of banging of heads, and you know they are going to kill each other. One person will die during this tussle.
Yeah, and then he clouts her with a doorstop in the shape of a pig, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. What do you think of that?
I mean, that's the thing that finally, ends her life. I think what a brutal message to go out on. We're back to that, like the bestiality, the animal, him holding it in his hand and him having like power and control, and I think you're meant to read it as payback and like, this is victorious, but there's Annie's mental health, as we've spoken about, is very fragile, and psychologically, although Paul is in a very anxiety-ridden, this is a very traumatic situation he's been through, and imagine the sort of coming out after that is the future for Paul, I guess we see in the sort of tag scene, is not going to be he's got a lot of healing that he will have to do. But for the intents and purposes of what we see in the film, his mental health doesn't actually seem to decline. So he's undertaken these actions in I guess it's it feels very much like male rage as well, and him not seeing her as a human, just I'm gonna blot you out. That's it. That's what I'm gonna do. You took from me and I'm gonna take from you, but the two things don't equate,
Yeah, I agree. It is this it's meant to be cathartic, right? It's meant to be a scene of catharsis, like, yes, he's finally getting the physical upper hand, where throughout the entire of this film, Annie's had it. She's been the more physically capable one while Paul's been bedbound. And in this moment, he's been able to overpower her, finally. But then with the decision to make the final blow with the pig doorstop, like you say, kind of comes back to that bestiality, that animalistic nature. But also remember, the pig is called Misery, right? So the real life pig, the real life pig is called Misery. The pig doorstop, could be, an ornament of Misery. And again, where he's already stuffed Misery Returns into her mouth and said, eat it. He has then hit her over the head with the pig, which she is also called Misery. And it's like, almost like your obsession, Annie, has led to your demise here.
Mm-hmm.
And I am battering you over the head with my creation that you love, that you've almost like dedicated the latter part of your life to the point where you kidnap the author. You're going to risk it all for this fictional character. Let me beat you over the head with it, and that's it, we're done, because I'm in control of this character, not you. And again, I don't know if that's what they intended, but that's how I have read it.
No, I'm also thinking as well, the film opens with, I guess, Annie breathing life back into him, so the kiss of life, and then it ends with him like taking the life out of her, but through the mouth as well, because you've got these two bookends of like interactions with the mouth, which there's something there maybe, but I don't know.
That's a really interesting point to, like, that really interesting connection to have made, this idea of like giving life with the mouth and also taking it away with the mouth. And also, again, not necessarily about food, but like how we verbalize words is via our mouths, usually, And again, words are Paul Sheldon's weapon for most of the time, right? He is an author. And so again, maybe there's something in that like that's how he wins his fights, is via the mouth, via writing these books. Again, like he takes power back by killing Misery, the character. And then he's put back into like prison by trying to make her somehow come back to life again via a bee sting induced coma, which I was like, I love that. Like, where's the story going? And then he takes back the power again by stuffing things in the mouth, stopping her from talking, and then eventually hitting her over the head, which means any words that could have been formed via the brain has now completely gone.
Yeah, it's a silencing, isn't it? It's a silencing.
It's a silencing. It's a great phrase. A silencing, absolutely. Absolutely. So, that's the end of Misery. We see Paul Sheldon releases a book, and his agent, Miss Sindel, asks if he would want to like write a non-fiction book about his time being kidnapped by Annie Wilkes. To which he says no, and he imagines Annie Wilkes coming towards him, but no, it's just a waitress. And she goes, "Oh, Mr. Sheldon, I just need to let you know I'm your number one fan." And again, James Caan's face here is just this like, I've heard that before. Very good line. So,
but I guess as well, it's like it's that moment, just to skip back, him seeing Annie is like, that's again, that woman's pushing a dessert trolley. So we're back to food again, and that association.
Oh, I didn't even pick up on that. Absolutely, you're right. Absolutely. And it's probably because like he just spent the past, time has passed, but 4 weeks being served food by Annie, right? True. Being served the meatloaf, being served whatever, the scrambled eggs a la Annie, Wilkes, she calls it. Oh, a la Wilkes. Oh, I missed up the line. I'm sorry. Like she has been serving him food. And so, yeah, you're right. Then he sees this waitress, or visualizes this waitress being Annie, and she's also serving food. So, yeah, interesting, really interesting connection there. So, we come to the end of Misery. As we've spoken before, it was critically acclaimed. Kathy Bates won Best Actress at the Oscars that year. Very well deserved, as we've spoken about. It's such a nuanced performance. Kathy Bates can go to some real highs and some real lows. She's incredibly talented, especially in this role. What's interesting is that this they wanted to turn it into a play, a Broadway play. And Julia Roberts was going to play Annie Wilkes. And Stephen King, vetoed the idea because Annie, and this is in his own words, is a brawny woman who can sling a guy around, not a pixie. So again, I don't like that either, because that's also like thin shaming, and like I don't like that. Like just could say like, oh, it wouldn't be appropriate for what I want this character to do. You don't need to shame Julia Roberts in it. But again, it's interesting, like, so Stephen King has this vision as, well, she needs to be kind of bigger to do the kind of physical labour that Annie Wilkes used to do, like lifting Paul around, being that kind of a more physically, physically oppressive or aggressive person. And you mentioned earlier, Rebecca, like how she almost fills the screen because she is a bigger person. But what's interesting about that is, even though that Broadway adaptation didn't happen, they did adapt it for a Broadway play in 2015. And it was incredibly successful, commercial and critical success, starring Bruce Willis as Paul Sheldon and Laurie Metcalf as Annie Wilkes.
Mrs.
Again,
Loomis.
Laurie Metcalf.
Mrs. Loomis.
Literally Mrs. Loomis. Literally Mrs. Loomis. But again, a slighter woman, right? A more thin woman. So it's interesting how, like, before they were like, no, Julia Roberts wouldn't be right. And I probably agree with that. Julia Roberts doesn't feel necessarily right for Annie Wilkes, but not in any way to judge Julia Roberts' acting performance. I'm just saying, maybe not right for Annie Wilkes. But Laurie Metcalf who is a thinner woman, that was decided to be correct for this. And she actually was nominated for a Tony Award for her performance. Like I say, it was critically acclaimed.
I can imagine the energy she would have brought to it.
Oh, I mean, she's a phenomenal actress, absolutely phenomenal. But again, what's even more interesting is Annie Wilkes has been played again through the second season of Castle Rock by Lizzie Kaplan, a notable thinner actress. So I wanted to ask you, how much does Annie's body type actually impact her characterization? If there's an active decision to not always have this character played by bigger people?
Firstly, I'll say that I've actually seen a theatrical production of this myself. Yes.
Oh, please tell me your experience.
Here in Liverpool. And it was on a revolving stage. So they had like the set on a revolving, and it was just incredible. It really was.
That sounds awesome.
But yeah, the casting there was a very slight, almost frail looking man. And someone that I'd say certainly reflects the body type that we see in the film. So yeah, I mean, to your question, wow. I feel like just that conversation we had there, where we spoke about Laurie Metcalf, and I was just thinking of like the energy and the depth and the complexities that she could bring. And that worked for me immediately in my head, and she, obviously she's someone who's like slight of frame. So to the question of like, how much does the body shape play into the effectiveness of the character? Because it's such an iconic character that it's like, it feels very hard to divorce. But I think, I guess that conversation we've just had is testimony to, well, why would it not work? But then again, I think we've got to go back to the source material as well and see what was there and make the correct decisions about what was there that we need to let go of and what's there that is important to take. And for me, that's character. So
yes. Yeah, I totally agree. So we've spoken about how Annie is a character. She's already got so many like darker qualities to her personality that make her villainous. Her body type doesn't need to be one of them. So I hope in a modern telling of this tale, they can go, actually, this isn't adding anything to the character, making her more or less villainous. It's just actually, if anything, it's just making this character more ugly. And I'm using air quotes, ugly, but that actually doesn't need to happen because her personality should be enough. The fact that, like, again, to your point, Laurie Metcalf, even Lizzie Kaplan, phenomenal actors in their own right, especially on the stage with Laurie Metcalf. I can imagine that kind of, when that facade drops, being incredibly powerful, and as an audience being like, oh no, like, you know, if you hadn't seen Misery before, going, oh no, this isn't good, you know. She doesn't need to also be uglified or vilified in other ways, because who she is, the character, is enough. And so when I read that, my initial thought was like, oh no, like they're taking away a character from bigger people, you know. But I think it is actually the smarter thing to do. And I guess maybe the next interpretation, whenever they do another adaptation of it, whenever they do the inevitable remake, they can cast a bigger body, but remove that lens that makes that, you know, that they're trying to convey non-verbally. Yeah, I think that's like the future of that character, because she's so nuanced and so layered and empathetic in odd ways that we don't need to add on this other layer of fat phobia on top. Like, there's so much already there to work with. You don't need the fat phobia. You really don't.
No, that's it. And I agree with you. I think the next iteration, it will be good to see, again, you know, to cast somebody, you know, more for the character, what they bring to the role. That person, it may be a slim person, it may be a fat person. It's like,
that's it. That's it. It's who's ever is right for the role. And I what I should say is that Kathy Bates was 100% correct for the role. 100% correct for the role. She's phenomenal. It's just how the film then treats her is the bit that we have a problem with,
and how it invites us to respond to that character.
Yeah. I wonder, like, if whenever they do the remake, because I'm sure it's going to happen at some point, Kathy Bates can play Buster's wife.
Oh, I love it.
Because, I mean, you know,
she gets to live.
She'd get to live, and I just think that would be really cute. Okay, and so the other weird like connection I wanted to bring into this, because I recently watched 10 Cloverfield Lane for a podcast a few weeks ago with guest Caitlin Cairns, and it was a really good. I mean, I love that film. Have you seen 10 Cloverfield Lane? Yeah. Yes, such strong Misery vibes, right?
Oh yeah.
Like I was watching, going like,
didn't occur to me, but now you've said it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, we've got being ran off the road. We've got being nursed to health. We've got a larger villain.
Yeah.
We've got this idea of desperation. And so when I spoke about that with Caitlin, I talked about how, like, male fat sexuality can fall into, like, perversion quite a lot. So this idea, like, you know, they're sex obsessed, or they are sexually perverse, and again, like, I bring in like so many examples, but like even like the Human Centipede.
I was going to say, yeah.
I know you've watched it recently, so
not my usual horror diet. So let's just say,
yeah, no, it's an intense film, but you know, that kind of like perversion, and John Goodman's character Howard in 10 Cloverfield Lane is a paedophile. It's perverse. It's gross. It's coerced. It's forced, and then so you have horrible representation there going on, and then you've also got in this one where it's fat female sexuality. It's desperate. It's fantasy driven. It's sad.
Yeah,
like,
whereas with the males, it's more like predatory.
Yes, fantastic word, Rebecca. Absolutely. And I just thought, comparing these two films, I mean, they'd be real good, like, sibling films to watch one after the other, and just show, like, how similar they are, and also how different they are in the way that they portray fatness. And again, it's this idea, like, fat representation is multifaceted. It is, you know, we get positive, we get negative. It's all worthy of being discussed. But just that idea of, like, you know, keeping someone, almost like the only way that these two fat characters can find connection is by kidnapping and imprisoning people, which is not great.
we need to work on that.
Great.
Yeah. No, but you're right. What two fascinating points of comparison to make. And the gendered aspect of it is fascinating as well.
Yeah, complete gender flip, right? Oh, because you've got, like, what's her name? Mary Elizabeth Winstead in the kind of Paul Sheldon role in that film. Again, they've both hurt their legs. There's so much going on there. I mean, Tickle Field Lane takes it that one step further because you've got the other character in that. What's his name?
Is it Emmett?
Blank. It might be Emmett. Well done. I mean... I'm like, I watched it not that long ago and I've just blanked. Caitlin, if she's listening, she'll be like, it's blah blah blah, and I'm like, I'm sorry. But again, that and I love that dynamic, bringing in the extra person into that fold. But yeah, apart from that, like the two main characters, the protagonist and the antagonist are the same, just gender flipped.
Yeah, no. Oh, that's fascinating. We need that's your next Ghouls article, Hannah.
Oh, you know what? I do need to get back onto writing because I have neglected it because
you've been a bit busy. So
I know. I need to, Gettle's always grinding. I say that's just it's always something to do.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, I looked at that AFI list as well, just to say, because I thought, oh, this is interesting.
Great.
Yeah. And
I'm so glad you did that.
I was interrogating it and I was looking at these top 10 villains that we've got there, and within those, the representation of women that we have. You know, we've got the Evil Queen in Snow White, Nurse Ratched, the Wicked Witch of the West.
Of course.
Regan McNeil.
Of course.
Alex Forrest.
Who's that?
Regan from The Exorcist, the girl.
Oh, The Exorcist, Regan. Yeah.
We've got Alex Forrest from... Fatal Attraction. Phyllis Dietrichson from Double Indemnity, okay? And then we've got Annie, who comes in at number 17. And she's got a very different body shape to these other women. So these women that make it to the top of the villain list, they're all very, conventionally slender, women, which I think is interesting. And then if we look at the heroes, we've only got two females in the top 10, and they're Clarice and Ripley. And if we look at those body types as well, I just think it says a lot.
I mean, I don't disagree with Ellen and Clarice being at the top there at all. I see that you've got your Alien VHS in the background as well. But you're right, and I am now. If someone was like press me, going, okay, well, who would you add to that list as a fat female hero? I would have to take some time, Rebecca, because no one's coming to my mind, right?
Yep.
Because again, like, hero insinuates that they are the main character of their story, and unfortunately, we don't have many fat female leads. So I am a bit stuck of who should be in there, who rightfully should be in there. Does anyone come to your mind?
I haven't seen it, but I read. It may have even been you. I don't know. Does the girl survive in Piggy?
Oh my god, Rebecca, I love Piggy so much. Oh my god, yes, she does. I absolutely adore that.
Is she
film.
more of a presented as a villain or a hero? I don't know, because I've not seen...
No, she's a hero, but it is complex. She's definitely a hero, but it is very complex. It's such a multifaceted film. It's phenomenal. Please, anyone, if you haven't seen Piggy, seek it out. It is brilliant. It'll make you cry. It'll make you root. It'll make you scream. Like the podcast I did with E. Grain on that one. I think I spoke to Kat Hughes recently as well on Jurassic Park, and as soon as we stopped recording, she was like, "Oh, so Piggy," and I was like, "Oh my god, Kat, Piggy!" Literally, I will talk to anyone about Piggy. I love it. It's a phenomenal film. But you're right. That would be a really interesting like addition to that list, because I mean, it's nuanced. Don't get me wrong, it is nuanced. But she is the main character, and she is triumphant at the end. And she's also probably morally correct, because there's a moment where you're like, I think I would have murdered some people. But she doesn't do that. She doesn't fall into that. She manages to to maintain the higher ground of not murdering people. You know, sometimes in horror you just have to, like, that's just the game you're playing. But no, Laura, oh, that's the actress's name. What's her actual name? Sarah is her character name in Piggy. She manages to not murder people, which is great. We love to see that. But yeah, that's a really good poll. But maybe that's a question we put to the listeners. Mm-hmm. Like, who could...
Yeah, like, not just in horror, but in cinema.
No, absolutely. Like, and I want villains and heroes. Like, who should be in there? Because we overlooked quite a lot. And again, I think it's that idea of, like, not the main characters of the story. Which is a real shame. Hopefully that will change. But we've got to be optimistic. We've got to be optimistic. Okay. Rebecca, is there anything else you wanted to bring up on Misery or any other tangent?
No, I think we've really... It's just been so fascinating to unpack this through this specific lens, and I think it's just testimony to the film itself and to specifically to Kathy Bates and her performance here. Yeah, she is just a powerhouse. I don't think I could add anything more to what's already been said about her performance. She is phenomenal. She is nuanced. To the fact she was a relatively unknown actress as well. She was a Broadway theatre person. And to come into this and just be like, you know, blow it out of the water is, I mean, what a debut. And then Kathy Bates is still iconic now. Yeah. I mean, Titanic is one of my favourite films of all time. She is the unsinkable Molly Brown. Absolutely adore Kathy Bates. Okay, so Rebecca, at the end of Facts on Film episodes, we like to rate our films based on how well we believe that they represent fat bodies. And we like to rate them out of ourselves. And the reason why we do that is because our opinions are our own. And I think it's really important that we don't get, like, I don't know, people could get really easily influenced or get really angry at other people's opinions. It's like, mate, you can have your own podcast, have your own opinion. Quickly,
yeah. Like, please, we rate it out of ourselves because they're our own. So I have 5 potential Rebeccas. What
oh my God,
rate?
1 Rebecca's enough to live with.
I'm threatening 5.
It feels like I'm 5 Rebeccas sometimes.
Yeah, oh God, I feel that. The amount of hats we have to wear, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I have a potential 5 Rebeccas. What would you give Misery for fat representation?
Okay. Do you know, I almost wish we'd have done this before, like you'd asked me before, so I could, like,
Ooh.
you know, like, maybe that's something for the future, because I think it would have definitely changed. Like, there's no...
That's a really good point. I mean, listeners, look forward to that, because Hannah will be implementing that. That's a really good idea.
There's no way I would have thought that I would come to this film and see what I've seen, and then to have what you've brought as well. So I'm going to say 2 Rebeccas, because obviously we've spoken about all these, you know, the animalistic and the, you know, the stuff with the food and the, you know, fandom, but then I also feel like there is a lot of nuance in there as well. So yeah, I'm going with 2 Rebeccas.
I think that's a really fair score. I'm actually going to go for 2.5 Hannah. And the reason why is because I think I'm always happy when a bigger person gets paid to do a really good job. Great, Kathy Bates got paid and it catapulted her career, right? She is, you know, one of the best actresses of our time. Who doesn't love Kathy Bates? That's awesome. I think there's so much complexity to her character, which is not to do with how she looks. And I think she's eternally watchable.
Oh yeah.
You know, you're second guessing her motives. What's she going to do next? She's great. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic character to watch. And then that level of empathy that Kathy is able to bring to Annie as well is just masterclass. And then what was my half going to be? I had a reason for my half. Fuck it, I can't remember.
Kathy Bates.
Just because I felt it. I was just like, I think it's good. I just think it's really... Where we don't have many of these fat characters that we can go into like this level of detail with and have like a whole, I mean, we're coming up on the hour and 45-minute mark, and we've barely talked about James Caan. We've barely spoken about, like, we touched on the direction, how much we appreciate it, but it's been completely about this character. I think is awesome. But where it lets itself down is, I think, actually a lot of the, like, the treatment of Annie and how she is represented as being a quote-unquote undesirable, and I think that plays into Stephen King's misogyny as well, because that's how he perceives the fact that, like, this is meant to be like a cautionary tale of his addiction, and he's made it this, like, fat person who has, like, you know, like eating issues and a pig called Misery. I just think it's just like, no. Okay, 2 Rebecca's, 2.5 Hannah's. That's not a bad score, I don't think. 4.5. I mean, we've had zeros on this podcast,
oh,
Rebecca.
Really? Okay, well.
Yeah, because they claim that these characters are fat and they're not. I actually did want to make that point. Kathy Bates is not that big in this film.
No, I had the same thoughts. Yeah.
I think it's that kind of modern lens where I look back going, my God, she's probably like a size 16. And it goes back to Silence of the Lambs makes this problem as well, where Catherine, the Buffalo Bills victim, she's, I think, a size 12 in the US, which is a size 16 in the UK, or it might be the other way around, size 16, I don't know. But she's not that big, is my point. And I'm just like, she's meant to be this big person. I'm like, she's really not. She's just average. Yeah. But again, it's that interpretation of what is average is very different to real life versus Hollywood.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining me on this awesome episode of Misery. I really hope the listeners have enjoyed it. And if anything else, go watch it. Go watch Misery. It's such a good film. I mean, you don't even need to tell you that. You probably already know. Really, really good conversation. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for like being my co-pilot through this. I've really enjoyed your insight. Can you please let myself and the listeners know where they can find you and more of your work?
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you. So I have, listeners might be interested in reading an article of mine called 30 Years of Misery, Obsession, Routine, Fandom and What Lies Beneath, because I just love a long title. So maybe I'll send that to Hannah and she could link that in the show notes. She's nodding.
You should have opened with that, Rebecca. I was like, hold on. Like, you literally wrote the article on that. No! We come on and we have to like sing our praises. That's the only way we get our work out there, right? There's no point being humble on here.
So I have a podcast called Talking Hitchcock that explores the work and the world of my favourite director. You can find that at Hitch_pod on Twitter, and then catch it on Apple and Spotify. I've also got a collection of essays with Moving Pictures Film Club on Hitchcock's women, so that is looking at, I'm truly trying to broaden the voices that talk about Hitchcock. It's a very male dominated sphere, so those essays are me looking at the women of Hitchcock through a female perspective, so check those out, and you can find me and my work on Twitter and Instagram at Pendle Pumpkin.
Pendle Pumpkin. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you so much to the listeners for listening. They can find the podcast at Fats on Film on Twitter, Instagram. And I actually have started a TikTok for the podcast, but I'm really bad at uploading it. So, I'll try my best. And then they can find myself at Queen Bee Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok as well. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I'll catch you at the next episode. And remember to stay fat.